Welcome to Daring To, a podcast that finds out how CEOs and entrepreneurs navigate today's business world, the conventions they're breaking, the challenges they faced, and the decisions that they've made. And lastly, just what makes them different. Well, hi, listeners, and welcome to Daring To. And today, joining me on the podcast, I've got a really interesting guest. Can't wait to get started talking to Bob Tinker. He is a serial entrepreneur, three-time entrepreneur, had one of the fastest growing technology companies in the world, believe it or not, which was ranked number one by Deloitte in their Fast 500 index. It was a company that was focused on mobile security called Mobile Iron. That was the last of one of his ventures, which eventually was IPO'd, which started with like 3 people. Can you imagine? 3 people. And then it became a $150 billion million-dollar company of revenue, right? So, I mean, that's pretty amazing. But that's not just the first venture that he's had. He's been very successful as an entrepreneur. So we're going to have lots of questions. He's written 2 books, both of which I have found riveting. One is called Survival to Thrival, and the other is Change or Be Changed. Now, Bob, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Rita. Great to be here.
So listen, let's dive into it, right? Because I did read the book Change to Be Changed, and I'm like, here's a guy that is like a serial entrepreneur, a successful entrepreneur, but he describes the entrepreneurial journey in like a really interesting way. You talk about it aging the soul, that, you know, it's like can be lonely, that it's, you know, when you first start out, the first thing that you're really focusing on is making sure that you don't die as a business. But yet within that, you also conjure up this amazing view of what it feels like when you grow a company to success, and talk about like just the amount of self-awareness and personal growth that you get as an entrepreneur. And that while the journey might be hard, it sounds absolutely exhilarating. So I kind of juxtaposed all of those like emotions and feelings and go, wow, tell me what it's like that made you, I mean, that's probably why you decided to write the book, right? But did you start out going as a young kid going, I'm going to be an entrepreneur. That's what I'm going to be. I can tell that. Even though I can think it's going to be painful, I'm going to do it anyway. How did you start?
I love that you use the word juxtaposition. That's exactly what it's like to sort of try and get a company off the ground and build it, and the highs and lows, things that go great, things that are terrible. I would even go as far as to say that sometimes it feels actually a little more schizophrenic than that. It really does feel very split personality. And, you know, in many ways, like starting a company is kind of irrational. Right?
Tell me more. How can it be irrational? All those entrepreneurs that are listening right now going like, Bob's telling me I'm going to be irrational.
Well, usually what happens is you've got a good job somewhere, you've been successful, and you're like, I'm going to quit that, go start a company that most likely will fail, and I'm going to work my tail off, and it's going to be awesome and miserable at the same time. Like, it is kind of an irrational thing to go do. You know, but when you have an idea or just believe that something needs to exist and you want to go try and build it, you know, you just got to take the leap and go do it. You know, when AJ and Suresh, my 2 co-founders of Mobile Iron, approached me to join them as CEO in, 2007, I was at Cisco. My last company had been bought by Cisco, and I had a great job there, actually. But when I saw the idea that Suresh and AJ were working on, I had this, oh crap, I got to go do that reaction. And, you know, I left vested stock on the table. My Midwestern father executive thought I was crazy leaving. But sometimes you just got to go do it. And, you know, it's an irrational act in some ways, but like many great things in life, they often start with somewhat of an irrational act.
What were you most scared about? I mean, obviously, like leaving like all the stock options and the security, but sort of moving into that role as CEO in a startup is different to being part of a big enterprise organization like Cisco. What was the thing that you'd say, that's kept me up at night. You know, if there was one thing that I was really, going like, oh crap, what was it?
Yeah, the thing I was most scared of, so rewind back to 2007 when I was jumping into the chair with Suresh and AJ. The thing I was most scared of is failing as a first-time CEO, failing AJ and Suresh as my co-founders, if I were not to be a good first-time CEO. You know, I'd never been a CEO before. It's sort of a big jump, and it was a big, compliment that they were willing to bring me on board. But I was scared that, man, my biggest fear was I actually don't do a good job as first-time CEO and actually screw up a perfectly good startup opportunity for these guys. I actually spent some time trying to figure out how to answer that question. So I'm actually not sure I've ever told this story before, but so I'm like, probably like 40, something like that. And
young, like that, young.
Yeah. It depends on your point of view.
Oh, it's definitely young in my books.
So I'm 40, been an executive, never been a CEO. And I wanted to figure out, like, if I thought I could do a good job at this and not screw it up. And so one of the questions I asked myself was, would I be able to actually hire people more experienced, smarter, better at their jobs than I was?
Ooh.
Because if I couldn't, then I actually wouldn't be a very good CEO, and I would actually be a roadblock to the team. So
isn't that hard though, Bob? Isn't that hard though, Bob? Don't you think that people find that hard to, as much as they want to? Maybe that's one of the things that leaders find difficult, to be in that position where you're actually trying to hire and have talent that is better than you, potentially. Do you think CEOs generally find that hard?
Oh, yeah. I mean, and look, it's actually one of the key criteria of the job, right? Because in the beginning, it's just sort of you and a small team, but eventually the job shifts to be more like, if you sort of do the analogy, like superhero analogy, the first CEO job is kind of like Captain America in the Platoon of the Woods, or Wonder Woman in the Platoon of the Woods. It's like you and a small team, like banging into trees, getting punched and getting dirty. But then the CEO job turns into more like Captain America and the Avengers, where it's like you and a band of superheroes. And you have to be able to hire grade A superheroes who all have better superpowers than you. You need a marketing superhero, product superhero, engineering superhero, a finance superhero, and they better be better at their jobs than you are. Otherwise, you're not hiring the right person. So I think one of the most important criteria for, an early and mid-stage CEO is, can they hire people better than them? And, candidly, I was worried that I wasn't far enough along in my career that I'd be able to do that. So I called one of my old colleagues. So my previous company is one of my peer executives. He was the CFO, and I was the VP of his development. His name's Jim Buckley. And I called Jim. I said, "Hey, Jim, we haven't talked in like a year, but I have an important question for you. And please be honest, because it affects other people." And the question was, here's what I'm thinking about doing. I'm worried about not being able to hire strong executives at this point in my career. If I were to go do this, Jim, would you ever come work for me someday? And Jim's a super seasoned, super senior CFO.
Mm-hmm.
And Jim's like, "Yep, I would." I was like, "Seriously, Jim, please tell me." Because other people, careers are on the line here. And he's like, "No, yeah, I would." So that was one of the ways I went, at least to try and figure out whether I thought I could hire people with more experience and better than me.
It's a great litmus test, right? Because if people are willing to follow you, then that says, hey, look, you've got something that they want to be part of, or you've got some capabilities that they really believe in, and or both and more, right? So that's a great sort of followership litmus test for leaders to ask. It's a great question to go and actually solicit to ask.
And here's the fun anecdote there is that 6 months later, Jim joined as our consulting CFO and then actually became our full-time CFO. And he and I worked together to build the company from 0 to 100 million.
He made a good decision. There's a CFO that read that, right? And look, it's interesting as you talk about it. I mean, in in change or be changed. I love that phrase. I use it a lot myself. Is the fact that you actually bring to reality what happens with startups, right? That sort of when you start out as the 3-person company, maybe the 2-person company, to then suddenly growing. And that with that growth, not only is it company growth that happens, but there's also growth within the company itself, right? Whether it's the company culture, whether it's the people, whether it's the CEO role. So tell us about that, because I think that there are some really interesting, I kind of likened it to, it's like, you know, it's a plant that's starting to grow, and you start to like, look what I can do. I can grow all these great leaves, and now I'm growing all these flowers, and I'm like just flourishing. But actually, you need a lot around it as well as it grows, because things change. So when do you think like the first sort of aha moment comes in for a new CEO, where they go, actually, it's not the same as it was when I first took this on. I need to think differently. I need to be different. From your own experience, when does that first sort of, I don't know, transition, if you like?
The first time that hits is at about 50 people, is in my experience. And, you know, this, you know, the book Change or Be Changed, like many things, sort of the inspiration for that was born from a frustration, like many things. And what frustrated me, having been a first-time CEO and being in the fortunate position to be part of a company that, you know, we grew from, you know, 0 to 1,000 people, is that I don't feel like I was very well prepared for how the CEO job was going to change as the company changed, right? As we grew from 0 to 50, 50 to 150, 150 to 450, 450 to 1,000, like the company changed. And as a result, my job as CEO changed. It's not like I woke up one day with a different title or anything. It's like, you know, I'm still the CEO, but my job's different. And I didn't feel like anybody kind of sat me down and said, hey, Bob, as your job changes, as your company changes, your job changes. So therefore, you have to change. And
why would you, right? You were successful. What you were doing was bringing success. Why would you need to change?
That's the irony of it, is that what I discovered the hard way is that, you know, the very things that actually helped make me successful in sort of the first CEO stage become the very things that sort of hold me back, get in my way, and screw things up at the next. And so to answer your question, like what made me start to realize, this is not working, was I started to fail at things stopped working that used to work. Like, it's kind of weird when all of a sudden you're like, the things that used to work suddenly stop working. And it's kind of maddening, actually.
You go like, it must be somebody else. It can't be me, can it? Because like, look, I started the company. I got it going. Like, so what else is going on in this environment that is causing this?
Yeah, sometimes that's the reaction. Okay, maybe it's the environment. I think, you know, one of the more important characteristics of a CEO that is particularly a first-timer is a little bit of self-awareness. Because, you know, when something's not going right, it's sort of like a parent. Like, you know, if your kids are acting out, like, you can blame it on the kids, or often you got to kind of look in the mirror and be like, what am I doing that's contributing to this situation? Like, it's kind of the same thing when you're a CEO. Like, if something's not going right in the company, sometimes it's the situation of the team of the company, or sometimes it's you. So you got to look in the mirror and be like, what am I doing to contribute to this situation? And I'll give you a really specific example. So when Mobile Iron got to about 50 people, you know, two things changed that suddenly what used to work stopped working. So the first thing was, when we grew from like 45 to 55 people, I felt like we got worse. You think when you add people, you get better, but there's this weird organizational breakpoint where at like 50 people, like the human brain loses its ability to track one-to-one connections. And all of a sudden, what used to work sort of organically just started failing. Like, I remember my customer success team and my QA team that used to organically be able to stay in touch on customer issues. Now we're like dropping balls between them. I'm like, what happened? We actually hired more people. We should be getting better. The irony was, as we got bigger, like the way we used to behave broke. And that applied to the team. It also applied to me. That was about when, like, look, and like a lot of founding CEOs in tech, like I was sort of a product customer person. Like I like spending time on product and customers, and I was reasonably good at it. And that was what was important in the very beginning of the company, 0 to 50 people, because you're just trying to survive. You're just trying to find some customers who give you some money and sort of prove that you have a business that's worth getting more capital. But then once we started winning some early customers and started to grow, that I kept spending my time on product and customer stuff, which is fine. But my team, and I give them huge credit for this, basically sat me down and was like, hey, Bob, we are not getting from you what we need. Like, we need you to be the CEO of the whole company, not just product stuff and customer stuff.
So, Bob,
and that was kind of a wake-up call for me, right? That, like, the things that I was gravitating towards because that's what the company needed and I was good at, like, I had to change my behavior to be the CEO of the whole company. Like, what are we doing on go-to-market? What are we doing on team? What are we doing on finance? Like, I needed to be thinking across all the different swim lanes of the business, not just spending time in sort of my comfort zone that I'd gotten good at over the last year and a half as we were sort of getting the company off the ground.
So let me just ask about that. You know, that's quite brave of your organization to actually confront you with that. You know, there are often sort of situations that you wouldn't find that even in a small startup, even if they'd known you for a long time. What do you think it was that...
What enabled that?
Yeah, you know, what was your, like, secret sauce that enabled people to sort of, like, stare you in the face and go, hey, you know, take a look in the mirror. You might not like what you see, but you need to hear this. What do you think it was?
So there were two things. One was culture. That in the very beginning of getting Mobile Iron off the ground, we sat down a team. There's just actually the 3 core founders. The second meeting we had as a team was, what type of culture do we want to have as a company? And one of the things that was important to us was a concept we called intellectual honesty, which is, hey, celebrate the good, but it's okay to talk about the bad. And we had sort of built that into the culture where it's okay to sort of, you know, put a stinker on the table and say, this isn't working or something's broken or this is not going well. And it's okay to do that. So I think culturally the team was wired and, you know, we had made it safe to sort of talk about the bad stuff. The second thing that enabled that conversation and that feedback from the team to me was that I regularly asked my team for feedback on me. Like, I'd be like, hey, do you have any feedback for me? What can I be doing better than I'm not doing? And at first they're like, yeah, whatever. We're not going to really tell you like what we really think.
They said,
but
we love you, Bob.
eventually, if you sort of keep asking the question and they give you tough feedback, the key is how you react as a CEO and leader. Like, if you get defensive or try and debate